It's my pleasure to introduce Helen Erickson with her presentation, The Persistence of Old Roads. Helen, thank you so much.
Good morning. So the first thing I'm going to do, first of all, it's crazy to try to put this particular project together. The first part's very easy. The second part is complicated because I'll be dealing specifically with roads in Tucson. Now, trying to keep track of those roads is going to be a real challenge for you. So I'm passing out these cheat cards so that you'll be able to Okay, so history is embedded in old roads. It's the connection between places, and these old roads tell us how people moved back and forth in the past, and what their constraints were, what their opportunities were, and how the landscape impacted these routes. And a lot of them have vanished today, but you can actually see them if you know how to look for them. And so I've gotten intrigued by checking on where these old roads have actually gone and what they meant to people at the time. Now, I was going to speak to Canadians who aren't here. The Canadian who is three Canadians. Okay, I'm sure all of them know where Arizona is. I know where Saskatchewan is, but I'm not sure I know too much about other provinces in Canada. So I just wanted to let people know where this whole thing is taking place. Much of Arizona is dry country, but the washes, arroyos, or rivers have sources of water underground even when they're not flowing. You can easily identify them because of the vegetation. Here, the fall foliage of cottonwoods defines Cienega Creek. Perennial watercourses have determined settlement and travel through this dry region for millennia. Tucson's location took advantage of a subsurface dam, which forced water from the frequently underground Santa Cruz River to the surface, making irrigated agriculture a possibility as far back as 2000 BCE. By the end of the 17th century, Spanish missionaries established San Cosme y Damian as a visita, or visiting church, of the Tono settlement on the west bank of the Santa Cruz, across from the future site of Tucson. The mission was served by San Javier del Bac, which was located just to the south. In 1772 to 1774, Juan Bautista de Anza led a Spanish expedition to California from Mexico City, following the indigenous trails that had followed the water for millennia. The Anza Trail, or corridor, became the Camino Real, or locally the Calle Real, connecting Tucson to Mexico City. In 1775, Hugo O'Connor, one of those wild geese of the Irish, established a Presidio, or fort, at Tucson for Spain. As the northernmost point of Spanish expansion into today's Arizona, it was a border city from the very beginning. For the most part, it remained under Spanish control until Mexico won its independence in 1821. From 1846 to 1848, the young United States gained approximately a quarter of its future territory as a result of the Spanish-American War. During that conflict, the Mormon Battalion, under the direction of Philip St. George Cook, and I'm not going to go into all of the background of that, but the point is they opened the first wagon road between the Rio Grande and California. This route took a dip into Mexico before joining up with the Anza Trail at Tucson. Again, the Anza Trail following the indigenous trail, which followed the animal trails, which, you know. In 1849, the California Gold Rush brought thousands of immigrants along that trail. It became clear to the United States that a direct connection to California was essential, and in 1854, Lieutenant John G. Park mapped out a route for a railroad along the 32nd parallel, a route that dipped southward into what was still Mexican territory at that time. By 1854, however, the United States had acquired all of the American Southwest. Texas had fought for its independence from Mexico and become part of the U.S. by 1845. As a result of the Mexican-American War, Mexico ceded the territory indicated in gray on this slide, which included California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. In 1854, the Gadsden Purchase acquired the territory needed to construct the proposed railroad along the 32nd parallel. So at last, in 1856, the Mexican soldiers marched out of the Presidio and the American military took over. Shortly thereafter, the Presidio was no longer used for defense, and civilian businesses were constructed in that area. Back in the eastern United States, things were not going so well. And sectional conflict leading up to the Civil War made it impossible for Southerners and Northerners to agree on a railroad route to the west. Recognizing the importance of the California gold fields, a compromise was reached, substituting a stage line for the proposed railroad. The service, created and run by a New York businessman, John Butterfield, opened in 1858, linking east to west in a guaranteed time of 24 days. Butterfield's route remained the major east-west transportation corridor until the Southern Pacific Railroad was completed in 1880. Excuse me. So, by 1858, two corridors were well established at Tucson: the Calle Real, running up from Mexico, and the Butterfield Overland Route, running west to California from the eastern U.S. Camp Yuma had been moved to its present location in 1852 and then rebuilt as Fort Yuma in 1855, becoming the second center of American population in Arizona. With the establishment of the Butterfield Overland Stage Line, Tucson became the main point of intersection of American and Mexican cultures, surrounded by the Tohono O'odham land with irrigated agriculture, which dated back 4,000 years. With the coming of the Civil War in 1861, the Confederacy claimed the Butterfield route, and the company ended its service late in 1861, only 3 years after it had been established. On February 28, 1862, the Confederates moved into Tucson. However, they held Tucson for only 80 days. General James Henry Carleton's first order of business when he took charge of the California Volunteers was to reopen the Butterfield Trail, and on May 20th, 1862, the California Volunteers retook Tucson without a battle. Moving east along the trail, Arizona and New Mexico were reclaimed by Union forces. The early routes established along Arizona's watercourses foreshadowed the transcontinental rail line, which was finally completed only in 1880. Freed from the need to access perennial water, which had been a major issue for earlier travelers, the East-West Railroad took a slightly different route, again because of topography, across the state, yet followed essentially the same corridor. A second rail line ran south along the Santa Cruz to Mexico. Early highways followed the railroad lines, and eventually these were gathered together and expanded as the interstate highway system during the 1960s. But now I'd like to turn to the persistence of some of the smaller roads that followed these corridors, specifically the trails through Tucson. While major corridors can be defined in a general way, persistent old roads can reveal history on the ground at a closer scale. And here's where you may want to start using your maps. Okay, I'll be talking about persistent roads in Tucson. So, because again, first of all, the roads changed names. You had the Calle de las Flores became Meyer Street, the Calle de las Milpas, the Street of the Fields, became Alameda Street. Calle Real is that Camino Real becomes Main Avenue. Calle del Arroyo becomes Pennington Street. Calle de la Alegría becomes Congress Street. And Calle del Correo becomes Pearl Street. And Calle del Correo is going to be one that we'll be talking about a fair amount here. As you can see, Tucson has a multi-ethnic layered history, going back to the irrigated agriculture of the Hohokam people, the ancestors of today's O'odham, who live on their own large sovereign territory just to the east and south of Tucson. Various Apache groups raided and settled in the area beginning about 1500. The Spanish missionaries arrived in 1539, followed by the Spanish military in 1776. Spain became Mexico, and Arizona became part of the United States. For the most part, change was gradual, with one culture blurring into another. But as in most places, urban renewal, the great discontinuity changed everything. And its huge overlying footprint deliberately rejected Tucson's multiple histories. But thanks both to citizen advocacy and to a certain amount of obliviousness, which is the only thing I can figure out, many traces of the past geography remain visible on the ground today. Historic maps help to retrieve these layers. General James Carleton, the guy from the California Volunteers, after driving Confederates out of Tucson, ordered Major David Ferguson to create a map to sort out property claims. This was completed in 1862. Ferguson's map documents some of the roads I will be discussing here. In fact, all of them. The next map that reveals the historic roads of Tucson dates from 1871. The General Land Office began creating surveys of Arizona as the need arose for selling government land after the Civil War. This survey of section 14 South, 13 East was completed by Solomon W. Foreman. He probably spent a fair amount of time in Tucson, as it was the only town in the area, actually in the territory at the time, and the outline of the streets clearly reflects their relationship on the ground today. Although he drew the Calle Real as a north-south road, of course it actually angles slightly to the west or to the east, depending which way you're going, as will be seen on later maps. Two locations I've marked here. The Buckley House, which was the Santa Cruz family home, was rented by Superintendent William Buckley of the Butterfield Overland Trail. He oversaw the area of just coming across Arizona here. And that building served as the Tucson stage station. And a blacksmith shop was located just south, remaining at that location until the 20th century. The map above here, or to the left, I guess, was drawn by S.W. Foreman in 1871. This was the first map that used the updated American street names, reflecting Tucson's campaign for legal status as a U.S. city. which this was finally achieved in 1871. So those street lines that you see here on the 1871 map are the street lines that you're looking at on your card, so you'll be able to relate that. Camp Lowell was initially created in 1866, just after the end of the Civil War. By 1873, it was moved to a site considerably east of Tucson. But its brief presence in Tucson determined the grid, the north-south grid, that set all street alignments after that time. So we're going to be talking about the part of Tucson that is not aligned to the grid that was there before the presence of the military. Some minor things had changed by the time of the 1886 Sanborn maps, although both the Buckley House, that was the stage station, and the Plaza de la Masia remain. Now that plaza is also on your little cheat card there, and there's a reason for relating these two sites to each other. The Calle del Correo, or Post Office Street, is called Pearl Street at this point, changing again from Spanish to English street names. Main Avenue, which was the Calle Real, shows that slight angle to the west, following the orientation of the then long-gone Spanish Presidio. And the Presidio really was what oriented the Calle. Either the Calle was there and the Presidio built along it, or the Calle was slightly angled to fit along the wall of the Presidio. By 1886, if you look at the Sanborn map, Cushing no longer ran through to Main Avenue. It seems likely that after the Civil War, the Butterfield route was diverted to run past the military area. And by the late 1870s, mail was being unloaded in the Plaza de la Masia. Toward the southern end of our map, a property from the second half of the 19th century is noted here, the Carrillo House. This house was constructed in 1878 by Leopoldo Carrillo, a Sonoran-born merchant, and subsequent members of the Carrillo family lived in the house until the 1960s. It escaped demolition during urban renewal through a tenuous link to John C. Fremont, who rented the property for a short period of time in 1881, but may never have lived there. The Carrillo House, now a museum operated by Los Descendientes de Tucson, reveals the footprint of the Calle Real that passed in front of it. So, urban renewal. This is a big change, right? As was the case with many other cities in that period, a large area of Tucson's central city was bladed. Urban renewal planning included large overlays with the intention of eliminating past geographies. So here you have an outline of the urban renewal area, and you'll also see that that area includes the streets that I'm going to be talking about here. Some beauty arose from the new planning. The Tucson Community Center landscape, designed by noted landscape architect Garrett Ekpo, is great modernist design, and today it's listed in the National Register. Let's go to Camp Street. Now, Camp Street is Broadway Boulevard. It was called Camp Street at the time that the mail was rerouted to the Plaza de la Masia because, of course, the military camp was there. Okay? It ran east-west south of that Plaza de la Masia. By the time the military had delineated the military quadrangle on the east side of Tucson's downtown, mail delivery was rerouted from the Calle del Correo and the Buckley House to this plaza called La Plaza de la Masia, in reference to the New Mexico town down the road, or possibly to an agreement that was signed there. The road connecting this plaza to the military camp was predictably called Camp Street. It was renamed Broadway during the first quarter of the 20th century, as is indicated by the 1919 Sanborn map of the area. A remnant of the plaza remains on the ground today, and you can see the current map, little maplet in the upper right-hand corner there. As you can see from the diagram in the middle of the slide, the street that ran through this section of Tucson, the streets have been decommissioned, but the aerial photograph from 1950 indicates that they were present at that date. Broadway and Meyer intersected just west of the plaza, and that's the point that is really interesting here. This is a urban renewal demolition period, and right in the center of this you can see a row of shops. One of them was El Charro, which is one of the oldest restaurants in Tucson, along Broadway Boulevard there. And then you can see where Meyer Avenue runs perpendicularly, more or less, here towards the plaza of the Tucson Community Center. Here's an aerial view of the Plaza de la Mesilla today. And eventually you can see where this discussion is going with those white dots that I've cleverly put in here. Here you're looking down Broadway to the west. And as you see, you've got those buildings, El Charro Restaurant on the left-hand side, and it runs straight into the wall of an apartment complex called the Flynn. On the left side, there is a picture that I still haven't been able to get the original of, that I found in the ladies' room of the current El Charro Restaurant, and took a picture with my phone. But it gives you an idea of how the street looked when it was aligned, running along in that direction. So here's the interesting part. However, if you imaginatively continued that alignment right through the building, on the opposite side, you come into a section of the ECBO-designed landscape called the walkway. And that, in that intersection, what you will see is, I'm not sure exactly what shows this best, but there is a bricked area that ECBO designed there that indicates the location of the intersection of Meyer Street and Broadway. And that was a very important business area to the Mexican-American community at the time. And so ECBO, in his modernist design, actually engraved that on the landscape. So Calle Real and the Butterfield Trail, Cushing Street and Main Avenue. There are basically three sections of this that can be interpreted today. One is the entrance into Tucson along Cushing Street of the Butterfield Trail. And then it intersected at Main Avenue, or the Calle Real, which is the bottom circle here. Now, when the urban renewal reopened that road, so now you actually are going past that same intersection that was there originally. In the middle is the Carrillo House, past which the Calle Real, or the Butterfield route, went. And then at the top, you have where the Buckley House was, the stage stop. So here's the Cushing Street view shed. Here is your incomplete version of Cushing Street. It was not carried through at that time. On the right is the urban renewal version. And what they had tried to do at that time, interestingly, they were going to put a freeway across there called the Butterfield Expressway. And this was defeated actually by a combination of neighborhood activists and preservationists. So it did not happen. So Cushing Street is still there. On the left, you see a photograph that was taken by a guy named Monthon in 1901. And what it looks like the important thing, you know, the horses, the cart, the buildings. But in the background, you can see a very important geographic feature of Tucson, which is Tumamoc Hill. If you look on the right side, I retook this photograph recently, you can see Tumamoc right in the background. So what this is really saying is this road now gives you the view shed of what you would have seen coming into Tucson back in 1858. And it's interesting because the Tucson mountains are really jagged, and then you sort of have this little rounded area, which is Tumamoc. You can see that from 40 miles out as you're coming towards Tucson. So this is obviously the landmark that led people to Tucson across this Butterfield Trail. And here's a sort of better, closer up view of Tumamoc, looking down Cushing Street. The Carrillo House is another place where you can actually envision this old road. This, as I say, it was dating from the 1860s and serves as the headquarters for Los Descendientes de Tucson. And what they are doing, as you can see from here, there's a historic photo here on the left. They are looking at interpreting that space in front of the Carrillo House as a sort of overlaid section of both the Calle Real, or Main Avenue, and the Butterfield Trail. And we've been working with the architect to find ways to indicate just the width of that road, because it was very wide. It was a big road coming through there, that it will remain on the ground today. Finally, the Buckley House, okay? Now, this was still Pearl Street, or the Buckley House, you can see it outlined here in green, was still there in 1950, but was taken out by urban renewal. So right now, that site is in the middle of a federal parking lot. If you can, and what was interesting, it sort of swung around to get to the Buckley House, and the reason was the other area of the Calle Real was really where you had the warehouses for all of the traders who were working in Tucson at the time. So this way you got out of the traffic, if nothing else. Also, just down from that and across, they have marked actually by a series of concrete, piled bricks, the southwest corner of the old Spanish Presidio. So this is like a hot spot. You've got the Calle Real, you have the Correo street coming to the Buckley House, and then also just across the street, in the upper left here, upper right, you have a vision of Main Avenue continuing. It goes through a historic district. It's essentially undisturbed. And the house on the right there, the Fish-Stevens house, is now owned by the Museum of Art. So this struck us as a perfect place to interpret all of these different layers. And one of the options here for interpretation, again, I'm going to sort of jump back and forth here because it's hard to keep it in one place. The Buckley House site is right there. The wall is right there, okay? We have a potential mural site along the edge of the Tucson, the Tucson City Center, or a government building there. And also right across the street, sort of directly across where number 5 is here, you have the possibility of having what we call a virtual interpretive option. So what we're working on right now is to create a portal through both the mural and this signage in this little plaza, so that you will have a virtual recreation on your phone of the various layers of this particular transportation corridor. Thank you.
Questions for Helen?
Yeah. So I was so curious. First, that presentation was amazing. Your graphics were so beautiful. I'm like, I must have been researching this forever. I just can't imagine. So many of our roads in central New York are actually old indigenous trails. I was wondering if that was also true.
If you want to start.
You're fine if you need to reference your presentation.
No, it's okay. No, I think that the indigenous trails are really important. And I think that one of the things that we've worked with in Arizona is ground penetrating radar. I didn't get into that with the Butterfield Trail, but they actually have been working on that across the state. The Butterfield Trail is now a National Historic Trail. And so right now, Park Service, may it long live, is actually mapping the specific course. And of course, a trail like that, like your indigenous trails, they're going to be like a basket of trails, right? But that doesn't matter because you're looking at a corridor there. And the corridors, like the view of Tumamoc, those are still so important because those were the landmarks that people followed. Actually, I wish he had come back because I had a student who was working at the song cycle for the Pima Maricopa for the Salt Pilgrimage, and she was using those landmarks that were described in the song cycle as the basis for the reconstruction of the Salt Trail. So.
Time for one more question, John.
Well, thank you for this amazing presentation about the layers of cultural roots and how they intersect this here at Tucson. I was just really wondering, you're exploring how you can interpret it and connect it back to modern day. But although you mentioned now that you're doing this, subsurface radar to sort of find things, but maybe, is there room to, a lot of this, the downtown there, it's like black car parts, would there be still archaeology down there? Would there also be something, a resource down the line for future and connecting against the urban scape that predated the 60s renewal?
Well, they did, okay. Tucson is one big archaeological zone. That's just how it is, okay? They have done the archaeology where the city government building is, and because they also put in a parking garage, underground parking garage. So that has all been done. Location of the blacksmith shop that I mentioned has been determined. We have been agitating for them to excavate the federal parking lot. Good luck with that. But what we felt here is that by virtual recreation, you can actually create a landscape because we have the topography, right, of this trail that is sort of elevated above the Santa Cruz, that we can create a pre-settlement landscape because we know what the vegetation is like. And then we can add the layers of the indigenous trail, the layers of the Spanish trail, So we're trying to find ways virtually to create these different layers of Tucson history. And we're working with a local TIF district, a tax incentive finance, I guess, district, to see if they will collaborate with us in creating this interpretive module, which we would hope then to be able to integrate into lots of places in downtown.
Thank you so much.